Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and around the world. I'm Kim Todd, Virtual Programs Manager here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. And on behalf of the CCI team, we appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow with us in community. Today, we are excited to be sharing space with Glenn Meier and Nathan Havey to discuss how to nurture stakeholder alignment and how collaboration and mindful planning can turn potentially contentious issues into sustainable, healthy relationships. As many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of business, as well as a movement of business leaders from around the world working to change the practice and purpose of capitalism as a means to elevate humanity. Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement by creating learning opportunities like today's session and building systems of support for practicing conscious capitalists through our Senior Leader Network membership and engagement with our local chapters. Several times a month, CCI offers virtual gatherings like this as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. Today's gathering will run for about 45 minutes. Glenn and Nathan will be in conversation for about 25 to 30 minutes. Then we'll transition to audience questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes of our session. We would invite you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen when we get to the Q&A portion, and we'll try and get to as many of your questions as we can during our time together. If you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. And I believe that we do have the chat open right now. So if you want to introduce yourself, say hello, let us know where you're calling in from. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so now I'm excited to introduce to you Glenn Meier and Nathan Havey. Glenn is a business lawyer and collaborative law specialist with Greenberg Traurig LLP. He has decades of experience negotiating and litigating commercial disputes to help clients build sustainable, collaborative relationships with their stakeholders. Nathan Havey is co-founder of Stakeholder Business, and he is the writer and director of the acclaimed film Beyond Zero. Nathan and Glenn have been part of the conscious capitalism community for a long time, and they are the perfect pair for this discussion. Once again, thank you both for being here. I'm going to hand everything over to you for you to take it away.
Okay, great. Kim, thank you very much. Thanks for organizing this, and welcome, and thanks to everybody who is taking their time on this lovely Valentine's Day to hear a little bit more about how we can give some love to our stakeholders and our stakeholder relationships. And so we're very fortunate, as Kim said, to have with us Glenn Meier. Glenn and I have known each other for a long time. Glenn was formerly the head of the Las Vegas chapter of Conscious Capitalism as well. So he has worn many, many hats. And he has taught me a ton about a particular area of application of conscious capitalism that I think for a lot of us, it's kind of like the water in which we swim. It's tough to distinguish this, but Glenn's got a very, very unique perspective that I've found transformative. And so it is my great pleasure to get to try to tease this out with Glenn Meier today. So again, I want to encourage you, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to use the chat, use the Q&A, and we will we may break in and get to those. But I think the way that this session and this time will be most valuable is for you to pull it toward you, make sure that you really get from Glenn what you want to know, because it is a unique opportunity to get to have his mind here to help us wrestle with some of the stuff that we're dealing with. So with that, Glenn, let's start with just kind of setting the stage here. And, conscious capitalism really emphasizes that we need to be constructing these win-win relationships with our different stakeholders, but that's hard to do. And so let's start basically, Glenn, why is it hard to build win-win stakeholder relationships?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I'm going to come at that, I think, a little bit from the perspective of my experience with discovering conscious capitalism, which was probably right around 10, 11 years ago now, and I had started to see stuff online. I was running my own practice at the time. So, I was not just a lawyer, I was a business owner and had employees and, wanted to be a good business owner for them. So I started to read things online and started to see things. I remember the words that really kind of gathered my attention at that point were win-win, and everybody would say we want to be win-win in our relationships with people. And I said, well, that sounds, really, really good. And then I remember in the spring of 2013, I guess it was, I was in my local Whole Foods, and I come around the corner of an aisle, and somebody's got a table set up there, and there's all these yellow books on the table, and it says conscious capitalism, and that is a word or a pair of words that kind of grabbed my attention. And so I grabbed a copy of the book, put it in with my groceries. As with most books one buys, it sat on the nightstand for a few weeks. And then I finally got around to reading it. And once I started reading it, it just sucked me right in, and I couldn't put it down. And I remember especially the whole section on the stakeholder orientation. I was just reading it and going, well, yeah, this is how stuff is, and how it should be. And I want to be a part of it. And these are my people. And I got to the end of the book and closed the end of the book. And I just had this great feeling of joy of, oh my goodness, I've found my people. And then that was pretty quickly followed with this kind of sense of dread of, hey, I've been suing people for about 20, 25 years right now. I don't think these people are going to have anything that they need from me. And that sort of started me down this journey of me understanding that it wasn't really about me and what people needed from me. It was, how do you take the formal way that we form and manage business relationships, and how do you line it up with this? Because to get back to the original question about, why is this a challenge? It's because we're different as conscious capitalists. We don't run by the default programs. And so if we use the tools that are in the default programs, one of the things I've really realized is that there is a lot of adversarial thinking and behaviors that are just baked into those tools. And there's actually, some economic research that backs that up and says that in traditional contracting systems, that there is a lot of interplay that comes up between people, that when you encounter a problem, you kind of get pushed apart and pushed away from each other, gradually kind of moving into these separate camps where, if you get into the formal dispute resolution system, you're getting ready to go to war. I mean, you are in an adversarial win-lose game. And so I said, okay, the win-win players don't have the option of not playing the game at all, right? We can't just opt out of the legal system. But they ought to be able to play the game that they want to. And it turns out that you actually can't.
So that's interesting, Glenn. But let's look at it. So for a conscious capitalist that is trying to play the win-win game of business, what's it like for them when they step into a system that isn't designed for that?
It took me a long time to figure out how to explain what I was seeing. And then I remember this old beat up car that I used to drive, and I would have to take it into the shop 3-4 times a year because this would happen. I'd be driving down the road, hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, like I was taught in driver's ed. And all of a sudden, even though I was holding the wheel perfectly straight, I'd feel the car start to pull over. My car pulled to the right. And that was, the wheels were out of alignment. And so, I kind of do what you do. You just cock the wheel a little bit to the side, and that corrects the problem. And eventually, that problem magnifies. And at some point, if you don't do something about it, you're going to wear out your tires, and you're going to have a blowout and a fiery collision, and that'll be bad. So you that's when I would go to the tire shop and say, hey, I need an alignment. So using these traditional legal tools has a similar kind of impact. It's not in alignment with the stakeholder orientation. And because you are using tools that come from an adversarial orientation, those adversarial behaviors have a way of working their way into it. And so the answer is, well, find tools that are aligned with your system. And so that was kind of the journey that I started on. At that point, I remember I go, well, somebody has to have figured this out already. And so I think I Googled conscious capitalism lawyers. And I, through that, started being involved with this legal movement called the integrative law movement that is really about, how do you structure legal relations in a way that is, on a more of a win-win basis rather than a win-lose basis.
Okay, Glenn, so let's go to the next layer of depth on this. So you've been at work on these kinds of tools for a while now. Can you help to give us a look at what does it look like, and how is it different from the normal system?
Sure. So let me kind of start. Let me go back to that car analogy, and let's imagine, we have figured out that we're starting to wear out our tire, and so we don't want the fiery crash, so we're going to go to the repair shop. So the legal equivalent of that is a tool called collaborative law, which is a formal system that has been adopted in, I think it's now 22 states and the District of Columbia, and is currently being considered in another couple of states. So, this is a rising legal movement, and collaborative law is simply something where people who are involved in a dispute of some kind say, we don't want to work against each other to solve this dispute. We want to work with each other to solve the dispute. And so they sign an agreement that's provided for in the statute that covers collaborative law that says we are going to work collaboratively on this problem. And one of the really interesting features about this particular legal model is that this agreement that I'm talking about, not only do the clients sign that agreement and say, we want to be collaborative with each other, but the lawyers also sign the agreement and say, we want to be collaborative with each other. And then, as a way of kind of having skin in the game, the lawyers say, not only are we committed to this collaborative process, but if something happens and the collaborative process falls apart and the parties need to go back to litigation, then we, the lawyers, are disqualified. So I can't act as a collaborative lawyer for somebody in a collaborative proceeding and then have that go back into litigation and I keep handling the lawsuit. So in other words, my continued involvement as a collaborative lawyer in a collaborative proceeding is contingent on that proceeding staying collaborative. So it really gets the lawyers and the clients all on paper aligned and going in the same direction. And then you just go through and solve the problem.
So that's amazing. And then, Glenn, that's sort of the theory of it, right? And so I get it conceptually, but can we go to the next level of detail on, like, what is the contracting process different here? Like practically speaking, for the senior leaders that are on the phone right now, if they were interested in dipping a toe in this, what would they do?
Right. So what you're really talking about here, Nathan, is not waiting until you've already worn down your tires before you go get some help. You're talking about having more of a preventative maintenance program. And that, that was not something I had to get into a new area of practice and kind of create, it was already created. And it's the big term for this model is relational contracting. And relational contracts are simply contracts that, in addition to having business terms and all of the kinds of things that you would expect in a contract, have things like statements of what the parties' guiding principles are. In some models, we say, let's write down what the shared vision, mission, and values for our business relationship are. The other thing that goes into that contracting process is you develop your own process for how you're going to deal with tension when it comes up in the relationship. Okay, so we're not going to do this adversarial thing where everybody goes to their own camp and we, say one side says this is what I want, and the other side says this is what I want, and some stranger makes a decision. We kind of design that collaborative process from the get-go, and there's advantages to doing that. One, you kind of just maintain a higher degree of alignment all the way along, and so instead of waiting for the misalignment to grow to the point where you say you really want to go deal with it because I'm about to have a tire blowout. And I think the other real advantage to having that contracting process go in place from the get-go is that the benefit that I've seen work for people using this method happens on two levels. So the first level is the efficiency level. You just literally have a process now where instead of parties working in opposition to each other, you're working in consonance with each other. And so that is by definition more efficient. And efficiency is good, right? But one of the reasons we really like stakeholder orientation is because we know about synergies. And we know about the idea of the whole getting to be greater than the sum of its parts. And this relational contracting process where you say, hey, we're not going to try and figure out all the things that could go wrong in our relationship and who's going to bear the brunt of them. We're just going to sort of encounter things as they come and figure out what the right thing for our relationship is as we go. That really creates the space for that transformative stakeholder work. I think this is where you really start to see what is the value of having diverse teams. Well, it's when every person on that team gets to contribute their unique bit of it. And so all of this is process that creates the space for those kind of things to happen.
Well, I mean, that sounds both inspiring and awesome, and it also sounds like it's a lot. We a lot of times in conscious capitalism, you make your stakeholder map, right? You figure out who your various stakeholders are. And are you suggesting that people need to take the time then to kind of go through this process with all of their primary stakeholders, or how does it go?
So one of the real critical things that I had to wrap my head around when I started doing this kind of work is that every situation really does call for a different, not necessarily a different kind of approach, but a different specific model, that fits for that relationship. You're not going to be able to go out and download kind of the standard fill in the blank relational contract. So you're right, it can be a lot. And so it's really important, I think, as a matter of fact, for conscious capitalists and senior leader networks, one of the things I'd say, the thing I want you most to take away from this idea is to be very intentional about not just your stakeholder relationships in general, but your relationships with each stakeholder group and each individual within that group, that you may need a different kind of relationship. So, you're going to need a different framework for your relationship with your employees than you are with your suppliers. And then within your suppliers, you're going to need different levels of relationship. If you have somebody who's like a one-off, I need to buy 1,000 widgets and everybody knows what a widget costs, and you happen to be able to get me 1,000 widgets in the time that I need, and that's all the business we're ever going to do together, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for us to also spend time in building this structure that's going to support a long-term relationship where we're each looking to innovate and create more value for each other. We don't need to do that. So that would be really item number one that I would want people to take away from this is make sure that as you approach, especially as you approach forming new stakeholder relationships, if you have a new supplier you're going to bring on board, or you have a function you want to outsource, if it's going to be a long-term and recurring relationship, really take a look and see, what do I need to do to structure this at the beginning in a way that helps it to succeed.
And so, Glenn, one other thing here is that you for the past few years have been at Greenberg Traurig, right? And that is
yep.
It's a big law firm, and big law firms are not usually the place that I go to look for really innovative, conscious capitalist practice. And so are you finding that you have to hide in the broom closet when you're working on this kind of stuff, or do you actually have some sponsorship within the organization? And are you having an impact in the way that Greenberg Traurig practices law? Give us a look at how it looks from your desk.
Wow, that question, that the hide in the closet language kind of hit me a little bit there, Nathan, because I will tell you that being a lawyer who says my job is to help people in business get along better, that has, in the decade or so that I've been interested in this, that has driven me to spend a lot of time hiding in a lot of closets. And the most curious and welcoming legal organization that I've been a part of is the one that I'm a part of right now. And so they've been really great with supporting participation in this. And really, like I said, being curious is the right word for it. It's not like I'm going to get an email from the chairman of the firm that says, well, you convinced us to completely change everything about the legal business model in the U.S. But they're curious. They are listening to what I have to say about this being an important area for lawyers to practice in, and they're waiting to see what I can do with it.
Very cool. And so then again, Glenn, just kind of summarizing a little bit, I think we've got a number of folks that came in after the original tee up for this.
Okay.
What you're saying is that as people seek to really practice the stakeholder pillar of conscious capitalism, they have to understand that if they get into the traditional legal dispute resolution world, that is sort of this pull away from the intentions and the ideals of conscious capitalism, and that what you're at work on right now, and what we're hopefully offering the Senior Leader Network folks for their consideration, is an alternative method that is far more aligned, and that the time to do that is not when you have a dispute, but it's actually getting ahead of it and paying attention to the way that we're contracting with people in the first place, that actually sets up the conditions for greater stakeholder alignment. Is that all summarized relatively well?
You've got it absolutely correct. And I guess, the way I'd reframe it and bounce it back to you is, we have said business is a win-win game. And that means we need the rule books for our game to be win-win rule books. And that is going to be something that you're going to have to come to somebody whose practice is more collaboratively informed to get.
Okay. And so, Glenn, just to, again, brass tacks, right? Let's say that I've got a new film project, which I do, and I want to get the relationship right with my sponsors, which I do. What's the process? I call you up and I say, Glenn, I need your help. We want to do the relational contract thing. What am I looking at in terms of timing and commitment? Like, just again, for everybody that's on the call now, if they want to go down this road, what are they signing up for?
Sure. So the first thing you're going to do is you are going to spend time, energy, and effort at the outset kind of constructing your rule book. Some folks that I work with, we like to use the term, you're creating your proprietary justice system. And so that takes some time, right? And you have to do things like spend time identifying what your shared vision is. Spend time talking about how you want to frame the values that are going to support your relationship. And so you have to be ready for that. You do have to, I should say, I'm getting a little bit out of order, because the first thing you need to do is make sure that the relationship you're contemplating and the relationship partner you're thinking about are a fit for all of this. You know, if you're a win-win player and you go out and you engage with a bunch of win-lose players, it's going to end up being a win-lose game. So you want to take that time to sort of filter the relationship and then create it. So, you know, you call me up, I'm going to tell you, Nathan, you have a couple options. One, Nathan Havey, as one person involved in this transaction, can hire me to be an advisor, a counselor. You know, this is what I think you should do. And that's, you know, an interesting way to go. I think what's a lot more fun is to say, Nathan, you're going to have to spend this time creating this relationship. And that could be anything from, if it's you and one other person, you know, maybe we take a weekend and do it. And if we're talking about something that's intended to be a years-long project that's going to involve lots of teams or large teams on each side, be more commercially complex, you know, we might be talking 4 to 6 months to fully create and form that contract. And then the other thing that I'm going to suggest that that you do is that, as part of that structure that you build, that you envision a role for somebody to act as kind of the conductor of the orchestra for the relationship, who's really just focused on things like process, and, you know, when a tension comes up, being able to say, hey, how are we going to work through this tension and ease it and go through it. That's an idea that's gaining some traction now in this field, called having a standing neutral involved. So those are some of the different ways that I, you know, get involved on a you know, hands-on basis on this stuff.
Okay, great. Well, one more question, Glenn, for just for the group, and then we'll go to Q&A. And Eric, I see you've got a couple of them in the Q&A. For anybody else that's interested, please use the chat or the Q&A to give Glenn your questions. But Glenn, just sort of big picture here, how many lawyers are into this? Is this you and a couple of interns, or is there a more robust group that's working on this? And I ask both because if folks are interested, obviously they can go to you, and I hope they do. But are there others too? How well developed is this? Since you mentioned that it's important that the lawyer on the other side is also somebody who's trained in these distinctions. So how easy is that to pull off today?
Yeah, easier than you might think. And I think to go back to the way you framed a question before, it turns out that there were a lot of lawyers hiding in this collaborative closet. And a lot of people who really see the value in giving people the chance to relate to each other that way, and to do that. I will say I'm not aware of anybody else that is, you know, inside a big law firm who's doing exactly what I do. Although, you know, we do have, you know, we have we have a group of people who are involved in a lot of ESG supporting work, and try to do that. One of my favorite lawyers in the firm does a lot of work helping people adopt voluntary codes, kind of like the motion picture rating code, and helping people self-regulate, which I think is another important piece of the conscious law puzzle. You know, how do you self-regulate and demonstrate as a business that you're trustworthy? So yeah, they're out there, but it helps to have an access point to that community, and I'm more than happy to be an access point for the conscious capitalism community to the integrative law community.
Sounds great. Well, good. Anything else you want to make sure that we lay down as foundation before we go to Q&A, Glenn?
Yeah, that it's like most things with conscious capitalism, there's some dualism involved. So on the one hand, you know, there's specific processes and procedures that can help you be more collaborative. And in addition to that, you also need to make sure you're bringing that genuine collaborative mindset into things, or, you know, you'll end up with your car pulling off to one side of the highway.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that is Glenn Meier, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh my goodness! I see one of my compatriots in the integrative law community is in the chat. Kara McCarthy Perry just poked something up. So there's another example of how there's more of us collaborative lawyers out there than you might think.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, great, Glenn. Okay, good. So moving to Q&A, Eric Moss has a question for you, Glenn, that is I think bigger in scope than the focus of the conversation. At least that's how it occurs to me. But I think that it's going to be a great thing for us to wrestle with a little bit. So the question is this: given that traditional models and frameworks are different for conscious businesses, and what you measure is what you get, then what standard metrics would you advocate conscious businesses collect? Which measurement standards, if any, such as ESG, come the closest to being that set of metrics?
So that's interesting. So I guess one thing that makes me want to say is, you know, the stuff that I'm talking about, I've been introduced at events before as the conscious capitalism lawyer. And I have really a piece of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. And Eric's question, specifically about metrics, is an important piece of the puzzle, and it's not really my piece. I will tell you, though, that a part of the more complex relational contracting models that are out there, like I'm talking about things that are used for, you know, decade-long outsourcing agreements, or vendor-supplier relations that are intended to go on a long time. Part of that will include identifying the metrics that you want to measure for that relationship. So I guess I'm now going to prove that I really am a lawyer, because I'm going to tell Eric that the answer to his question is, it depends.
That's good. And Glenn, if you don't mind, let me chime in with a couple of things here. Eric's got a follow-up for you, but Eric, okay. Bigger picture, kind of across the movement, there's a few things to consider. There is a very aggressive set of metrics in the ESG framework, as I'm sure you're aware. My own take on that is they tend to be sort of harm prevention kinds of metrics. Let's screen out the bad practices, and certainly that's a great thing for us all to do. But then there's they don't really scratch the itch if you're looking at really reaching the heights of the 4 pillars of conscious capitalism. And so conscious capitalism doesn't have a discrete metric set, but there's a number of different efforts that kind of in fellow traveler parts of the movement. Obviously, Benefit Corporation is a classic. There's another framework that you might take a look at called the Stakeholder stakeholder score. They identify 6 pillars that are much more in the aspirational kinds of metric sets. Or there's other folks that really say that it boils down to things like trust, and that you can do a lot worse than really getting a good sort of way to measure trust in your stakeholder relationships, and let that be the metric that you're really using to track your ability to perform as a conscious business. So there's a number of different approaches to do it, but there's not yet a sort of, yep, this is the standard metric set that we're all going for. So happy to dig a little bit deeper on that if you wish. But Glenn, Eric did ask, what metrics should be included in the legal relationships then? Where would you go on that one?
Right. And you, Nathan, have teed it up perfectly, because it does have a lot to do with trust. That's when people file lawsuits, there has been a breakdown in trust somewhere along the way. And so an example of, so let's say you and I are formulating a conscious contract with each other, and we have different obligations to each other. So one metric that we want to track, and I'm going to sound like a politician, is sort of like promises made, promises kept. And it maybe not that simplistically, but how faithfully have people honored their commitments? I said I was going to do something and I did it, or I said I was going to do something and we reached an acceptable renegotiation of what I was doing. Those are the kinds of things that you can track and really help measure trust, which I think that's the key component for all of this.
Perfect. Okay, Glenn, next question. This one is from Maria, who I think said she's in the Midwest somewhere. Maria, thank you for the question. It goes like this. Thanks for this interesting set of points, Glenn and Nathan. I'm on the verge of starting a partnership relation, and my future partner and I have to set up how our starting up is going to work among us. Ownership, responsibilities, etc. How do I start the conversation as a collaboration and not as the typical what's in it for me? She's looking for practical examples if possible.
Yeah. So Maria, just from hearing what you're talking about, I think your situation is really well suited for an approach called conscious contracts. And if you go to the website, consciouscontracts.com, you will find, among other things, a data bank of practitioners. And if you said you're in the Midwest, and depending on where you are in the Midwest, I may know some practitioners specifically in that area. But here's how, one of the ways that process works is people get together and they start with what is our, different terms get used, either our touchstone, or I use the term cornerstone, which is really what's our shared vision, mission, and values. And Maria, I have found an excellent way to start that conversation is to go to your counterpart and say, hey, I'd like us to be on the same page about, a shared vision, mission, values, however you want to do it. And here's what I think of it. You kind of have, it helps to be the first one who's willing to, so many relationship analogies come up. I want to be the first one to say I love you.
Valentine's Day, Glenn, lean into it.
It is. We're spreading the love. So, but yeah, the way I think to start that conversation is, and you can even explicitly say, I want to have a conversation about what's in it for we, and just demonstrate that you're coming from that perspective. Say what you think about kind of these big tentpole principles that are going to anchor your relationship, and then be open to hear what the other person has to say and how their perspective should impact yours.
And Maria, let me add, if I may, Glenn, I've been through a conscious contracting process once with a team that I worked on. And it was everything Glenn said. And for me, one of the things that was particularly interesting is that we went through a process to specifically define how we would disagree. And so if there was something that really seemed to be that there was a misalignment at some point between the purpose and the values, because at the beginning, it's easy enough to align on those things. But then when you get into the work of it, that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And that listing, to go back to our wheel alignment analogy, starts to happen. And so the critical thing in the conscious contract that I was part of creating with my team was, what do you say when that starts to happen, and by what method do we address it early so that it isn't at a place where there's major broken trust that we have to repair? And one of the things that I think is really interesting, again, as a practical example, is that rather than defining that somebody has to raise the red flag when there's a big, heavy, nasty conversation to happen, it might be a better idea to build it into like the weekly touch base or a monthly priority setting meeting, where there's a standing agenda item for anybody to raise anything that's been bugging them. So it takes less social capital to raise the flag, so to speak. So there's little things you can build into just the agreement to make it the normal operating procedure of the partnership that can help to kind of set you up for success. And so I hope that that's a reasonably practical example. And Glenn, anything to add that you've seen that's at that level?
Just that I think, Nathan, thanks for sharing that experience, because it's valid, and it was a great illustration of kind of how the process can work mechanically. And yeah, and you got it. You need to go to law school so that you can become an integrative lawyer.
No, no, but thank you. Anyway, so let's go on to our next question that we've got, Glenn, and this is a good one. So Claire Chapman, Glenn, can you see a role for blockchain to help create win-wins in commercial partner supply chains?
So I start with, I'm not a blockchain expert, and yes, I think there is a role. I think the blockchain role is more in how do you really efficiently manage more transactional relationships. I'm not smart enough on blockchain to see how it can work into the more relational aspects of what I'm talking about. But if somebody told me there was something I'd missing, I would sit down and listen to them.
Again, just for the interest of time, Glenn, we're going to keep moving here. Corey Blake. Corey, thank you very much for giving us your time today. If y'all don't know Corey, you need to. Corey asks, if one party wants to toss out the relational component and go adversarial, how will a judge treat an argument like that in court?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to start with Corey has eternal and undying gratitude to me, because he was one of the first people in the community that I really talked to about this, and has ever since then, been a huge support in terms of telling me I was onto something and I needed to keep going, even when I felt more like hiding in the closet. So thanks to that, Corey. So here's kind of the legal answer to that, is that you can, as part of any legal agreement, you can specify alternative processes for how you're going to handle a dispute. So we see this all the time in arbitration agreements, right? If we have a dispute, it's going to go to arbitration. It's not going to be handled in a litigated lawsuit. And if you have a contract like that and you put it in front of a judge, they will tell you, go to arbitration. You can also put provisions in your contracts that say the parties are going to meet in good faith to talk about how to resolve any disputes, or you can have a robust proprietary justice system that we talk, like what we've talked about here. And I will tell you that in general, usual caveats about anything legal is fact specific and depends on the specific situation. But in general, courts are going to uphold parties' agreements to stick to those processes. Now, if you get to a point where there's been some effort made, or it's just really clear in something like this that somebody is going to insist on playing a win-lose game, at some point you're going to lose the ability to force them to do that. So the answer to Corey's question is that one of the really cool things about including these kind of provisions as part of your legal agreements is that you can actually get the legal system to say, no, go back and be collaborative. That's what you said you wanted to do. At some point, though, if it looks like those efforts just aren't going to be fruitful, then you're going to get to go back into the default system.
And so with that, Glenn, we are at time. Kim,
Okay.
why don't you come back on and close us out? But I will just make the point that if everyone's reading between the lines of what Glenn's saying there, the more people we can bring into this movement and have them sort of understand the benefits of operating in the conscious capitalism model, the more people there will be that could be these kinds of opportunities to transact this way. And the benefits of doing so create a virtuous cycle. Looks like you wanted to say one more thing, Glenn, before we close.
I do, because I saw one more question pop up in the Q&A that I can actually give a definitive answer to.
Oh, okay, please.
Which is
Jeremy, sorry I missed you.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you
question from Jeremy was, are you aware of any franchise companies that have built conscious capitalism or related ideologies into their franchise agreements? And the answer to that is an unqualified yes. And oh, Jeremy, would I love to have a conversation with you about that.
Great. We'll have to connect Jeremy and Glenn after this.
I know how to get a hold of Jeremy.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, on behalf of CCI, Nathan and Glenn, thank you so much for this conversation and sharing your insight into a really, really important topic. I think the audience has some really, really good practical takeaways here. And yeah, stakeholder orientation and building those relationships and that trust is so important. Once again, thank you for being here. Our audience members, thank you for being here. If you have just 30 seconds, we'd love to get your feedback. It'll help us with some future programming. I've dropped a link into the chat. We would love your feedback. If you want more information about CCI and upcoming events, there's also a link in the chat, and we hope to see you at our next gathering. Hope everybody has a fabulous Valentine's Day. See you next time. Thanks again.